Ryan's got the hiccups. Hiccup, hiccup. Welcome to Lesson 1, the foundations of the science and the science of the smart baby sleep system. I'm Angela, aka the Science Mommy, to share this video for this part because it just illustrates that face-to-face synchrony that's happening between parent and baby, and the attachment system that we'll talk about more is foundational and follows us through life and determines our abilities, really our social and emotional abilities, and how we function in relationships and how we even see the world and relate, kind of our worldview and our mindset, and all of those wonderful things that psychologists have to deal with and talk about. And it may surprise you to know that the attachment systems are almost 50% of the population, even, kind of summarizing adult studies and studies of 1-year-olds, which is when they start to usually test the secure attachment versus insecure attachment. But almost 50% do not have a secure attachment. Just if you're able to follow your instincts, you do automatically nurture that attachment. So it's not something to worry about, but it is something to be cognizant about, that it is a fragile system, and we want to be able to facilitate parents to follow their instincts and let the instincts be a guide for how we parent in every way, especially when it comes to sleep. I want to just share a snippet of what's happening in those first few years, really in the first year and a half, primarily in your baby's brain. So your baby is born with 25% of the brain formed in terms of related to an adult brain. And in the first 2 years, your baby's brain goes from 25 to 80% complete. In the first 3 months, just in the first 3 months, your baby's brain doubles in size. And this helps us understand in terms of not just the physical growth, the enormous physical growth that's happening, all of that constant, almost constant feeding that's happening in the first 3 months is literally fueling your baby's rapid brain growth. And, glucose is the main fuel of the brain, and it is a very hungry little brain and a very tiny little tummy that needs to be constantly refilled to fuel that rapid brain development that's happening. That the brain and the comfort that we're offering the baby is giving the brain a safe environment to just focus all the energy on growth and making those connections, and in connecting up the systems that will come online in the following months and years, but especially months, okay? Because you can see that by 2 years, it goes from 25 to 80%, which is really phenomenal. And it's not just in terms of the volume of the brain, it's in terms of the intricate systems that are forming, especially in the social emotional systems of the brain, because those are the systems that are almost entirely dependent on or forming in relation to the relationship, interpersonal interactions, the face-to-face play and communication that's happening that we took a look at in the first slide, and then just as importantly, being able to regulate the distress and being able to calm the baby and soothe the baby when they have the negative emotional upsets, which are unavoidable. But those two things are literally what is fueling this tremendous growth in terms of the different areas and systems that are connecting up and coming online. So by the age of 2, your baby's brain will finally resemble an adult brain on on a brain scan in terms of all the parts and systems being there. Of course, it will continue to become more sophisticated and prune away different connections and sort of customize itself more to the unique environment and what its unique experience. But by the age of 2, those different parts of the brain are all there, but not before. So this is really enlightening for us parents in the first year and in the first 2 years to realize that a baby really has a very different brain. And so they don't have the capacities that a 2-year-old has or even an older child has. So we really, it helps us to, in those times when baby is not sleeping or is nursing constantly or won't let us put him down, they just don't have the capacities, and it's easier to not be as frustrated and just realize your baby is working with a very different ability and capability. And it helps us silence those kind of cultural voices that tell us what our baby should be doing and just understand what our baby is capable of. So an easy and oversimplified, to be honest, way to look at this is in terms of low brain versus high brain. And the low brain is what your baby is working from. Your baby is working from a dominant low brain. So the survival instinct and the drive to feed and to keep you physically in touch with them is primarily what they come into this world with. Those drives are dominant. And I just want to go back to this slide for just a moment to emphasize that the 2 biggest drivers of brain development are sharing playful, positive emotions with this kind of face-to-face communication and sharing a joyful state with your baby, and regulating distress. So I think what brings you here to this approach with me is that you have an instinct that you want to be able to share these positive emotional states, so you don't want to just suck it up and be sleep deprived. You also want to be able to regulate your baby's distress, and you're having concerns about some of the harsh sleep training methods that require you to ignore that distress or to stifle that communication. And so I just want you to know that your instincts to want to do this in a way that is respectful of the attachment system and the developing brain, your instincts are right. And the more I studied, as just putting on my journalistic hat and researching and going to original sources and studies, it really was amazing that at every turn, the research really validated my instincts so much more than the parenting books at that time, at least. There's some good ones now, a few, but the cultural perspective just in the modern Western society in which we live is not as in line with the science as your instincts are. So I just want you to feel really empowered and validated in following your instincts to regulate distress. And I'm going to show you how to apply that to sleep. So just to wrap up the foundations of the Smart Baby Sleep System, so you know what it's based on, some of the foundations that it's based on, other specific applications of the brain science will be pointed out as we go along and get more into the details and the specific tips and techniques that you'll use. But just to wrap up some of the overarching fundamentals of this smarter approach to your baby's sleep is that it's smarter because your instinct is a smarter way to approach every aspect of care for your baby in the first year. And so this is a way to approach sleep that embraces your instinct and embraces your baby's instincts as well. It supports optimum brain development by keeping stress to a minimum, by utilizing that natural reaction to respond with comfort to the baby's distress. It protects that synchrony with the caregiver, which we learned from developmental neuropsychology. That is the very thing that is forming and fueling the growth of the social and emotional brain. And you'll see a lot of great resources for that at the end in the resources section. It's also fostering, just from a psychological perspective, your baby's trust in the world, trust in himself to have agency to affect the world, to affect his world, to affect you, his parents, and trust in you, trust that you will listen to him and respond to him. And then, of course, this is a big one. It goes way back to Freud, but Dr. Alan Shore from UCLA was a big influence on me in this area of the development of the core self. The core self is forming in the first year, and if you want to explore when you get your sleep on track and you're able to, I highly recommend Dr. Alan Shore's books about how the critical periods of brain growth are happening in the first 18 months, and that right brain is in its biggest growth spurt during that time, and that's the same time that the core self is forming. So your baby's sense of self, his sense of worth in the world, his sense of being able to affect his world, it's the roots of confidence and self-care. It's just the roots of so many incredibly important aspects of the developing self. And that is a huge influence on the Smart Baby Sleep System. And just to give you a few examples of how this is applied in the sleep system is by keeping stress to a minimum, we are helping shape the brain because of the sort of neuroscience tenet that states become traits. And this is something that Dr. Bruce Perry first said and explained, that during the time that your baby's brain is developing, the emotional states that she is experiencing are becoming hardwired into her brain. And so that means that those emotional states that she's experiencing most often and most intensely are going to become personality traits. States become traits. So it's kind of a nice mantra in itself to realize the importance of following your instinct to keep your baby calm as much as possible. You know, upsets are going to happen, but that action of you stepping in and calming them and bringing them back to an emotional state that's in harmony and that, you know, feels good to them, just that action itself is forming the personality traits and helping the brain learn to regulate those emotions. So it's really a wonderful privilege to be in a position to do that for your little one. Another example that is a really important takeaway, I think, that the reason all of this brain development matters and how you as a parent are influencing the brain development is because every action, every emotion, I should say, has a chemical reaction. Okay, so we know this is true even in our adult experience, that emotions have a chemical reaction, and we can feel the emotion, but we can also feel the chemical reactions in our body. So we feel them physiologically often. Now, this phenomenon is amplified in babies because they don't even have the higher brain reasoning. They can't talk themselves down from feelings with logic and planning like we can. And so their experience of, you know, the pure chemistry of what the emotions are causing in their body and brain is amplified. So that's something that I think just helps to validate this approach so much in your approach as a parent when you're following your inner voice is to remember that those emotions your baby is experiencing has a chemical reaction, and that is determining how the brain develops and forms, even the neural structures of the brain. So there's a whole field that I've actually gone to some of the conferences that are completely dedicated to this field of interpersonal neurobiology. And it's the study of how interpersonal interactions and interpersonal relationships are literally forming the biological structures of the brain. For example, research has shown, and you'll see this in the references section, that loving and supportive in-sync interactions, so lots of responsiveness that this system is an example of, those types of interactions are correlated with a larger hippocampus. So your baby is developing a larger, more robust hippocampus because of those responsive, calming, in tune, in sync interactions. That type of care is changing the structure of the brain, an actual major structure. In fact, the hippocampus is an incredibly important brain structure as we develop in especially in adulthood. It's key to so many aspects of a really well-functioning brain. For example, just how the right brain and the left brain is able to integrate. And, you know, we could spend time on that, but if you know anything about the right brain functions and the left brain functions, it's kind of the old way of thinking if you're more right-brained or left-brained and what that means. But what it's really about, they're finding, is the integration between the right brain and the left brain. How well you can integrate those two sides together and synergize that is really going to give you the best outcome and the best functionality. So the hippocampus is key in that. And that's just one example of how these social and emotional foundations are so essential, and they are forming in direct response to the type of care. So having a sleep system that's conducive to this type of care, I just think is really exciting, and I devoted the last 5 years of my life to developing it. So I'm really excited to dive in to those pillars and the 3 pillars of Smart Baby Sleep, which are the sleep environment, wake times to avoid overtired, and then finally nudging toward a sleep goal. So that's the way that we transition baby to whatever the goal is, and that's what you decide as a parent, not what society tells you it should be. But as you reverse engineer what you want for your baby, now and for the rest of her life, the happiness, connection, courtesy, all of those things, success, the executive functioning capacities, all those high brain capacities, those are built on the social and emotional foundations that are forming right now and in direct response to what you are doing in the care that you're providing. So what you're doing is super important, and I just applaud you for just being in it and following your instincts and embracing your inner voice. And I just want to emphasize that you're right, and what you feel is the best way to care for your baby is the best way. And I'm going to give you the tools to implement it.